interesting talks this morning, we also need to hear the voices of some of you sitting out here. So later on, I'll let you know when. We'll pass the microphone around and you'll be able to ask questions and give us your perspective as well. We have a lot of interesting ground to cover this afternoon, the next couple of hours. And we've been warming up the floor, so it's melting beneath the feet of our next keynote speaker, who will give us a picture of the ambitions for Denmark's presidency of the EU. How can the EU strengthen both international partnerships and the resilience of the EU under Danish presidency? And this is something that our first keynote speaker will address in just a few seconds. So join me in welcoming State Secretary for European Affairs and the Arctic, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Denmark, Jonas Bjerring Lisberg. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the welcome and the invitation. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here speaking on behalf of the Danish government and to see the interest in this very timely topic, not just for the Danish presidency, but for the European Union as a whole. We're extremely busy these days bringing all of Europe to Copenhagen. I'm glad that the organizers of this conference is also keeping a focus on the global perspective, because Europe needs to keep its global attention turned on, even if we struggle with some very serious, very difficult, existential even challenges on our own continent, whether it's defense, whether it's support for Ukraine, whether it's competitiveness, whether it's dealing with new political realities and winds from east and west. We do need also to keep the broader perspective in mind. I know there will be a more discussion like exchange after my presentation. So let me just briefly try to set the scene. What is the state of play when it comes to the EU as a global actor, with a particular focus on the EU's ability to form strong partnerships around the globe? What I'd like to do is to outline a macro analysis, so to speak, that is informing our presidency when it comes to development and its interlinkages with foreign policy, trade policy, and export promotion, because they're all linked. This is a priority for our presidency, but I'm glad to say it's also a priority for the Commission, the European Commission, and the High Representative for External Relations. And so I think the EU is fairly united in its analysis. What is lacking sometimes is action and attention because of other important urgencies. Why do we need to strengthen the EU as a global actor? Maybe it's obvious, but I think it's worth quoting Mark Rutte, currently NATO Secretary General, formerly the Dutch Prime Minister, who said a few years ago that the EU has a choice of becoming a player or a playing ground. And in our view, that's even more true today than before. And in our view, it's even more crucial to the preservation of our interests that we succeed in becoming more of a player. It's easy to say, it's difficult to achieve. And when we've said that, I think we also should avoid the pitfall of underestimating ourselves, underestimating the EU's potential as a global player. We have lots of strengths, and together I think we can be really strong. And maybe that's also the main reason why major powers around the world, both East and West, are not so keen on speaking to the EU as such, but would rather speak to individual EU member states so as to avoid the collective strength of the European Union. then there's the question of how do we set priorities for a stronger global Europe? In this time of geopolitical upheaval and uncertainty, the EU should strive to be a preferred, stable, and long-term partner. To do this, we must build on more equal, more mutually beneficial global partnerships, as Mette also referred to, not least with countries in the so-called Global South. It's about political attention, it's about respect, but it's also about interests and about economic and political opportunity. And in this respect, I think Europe needs to bring more to the table. As it's often been said, we should listen more, preach less, but also come up with offers that are attractive on issues such as quality, reliability, stability, respect for internal decisions and interests of our partners. And I think we can offer more integrated and comprehensive partnerships, including by inviting the private sector to take part in this effort. That's why Global Gateway, even if some of you may be a little impatient to see the actual results from Global Gateway, I think holds a lot of promise. And I'm glad to say that some of our ambassadors abroad have reported that locally things are picking up on this endeavor to more systematically offer an alternative to, say, for instance, the Belt and Road Initiative by China. And I think that effort is both a means to forge global partnerships, and it's also an end in itself by creating growth and prosperity, not just in Europe, but also in partner countries. This is also why we should use trade policy more strategically. And of course, this is an extremely difficult time for the global institutions for trade policy, WTO. But I think the European Union is a very credible and committed partner also to countries from the Global South in the WTO, especially now that the US is building tariff walls around itself and not upholding the key principles of the WTO. We remind ourselves from time to time that yes, our trade with the US is extremely important. We intend to continue a strong trade relationship with the US, but it's only 13% of the entire EU trade. There's 87% of our trade being handled with and by other countries, and we can build on that. And we should make sure that that trade is still governed by rules and principles, and opportunities are exploited to expand it. So, to sum up, we live in a world characterized by geopolitical rivalry and polarization. It's a challenge, but let's be frank, it's also an opportunity, a call for us for action with other partners, and the EU should seize this opportunity. And the EU has the potential to step up as a global actor. We're already the world's largest trading bloc and the biggest development partner. Furthermore, the competitive edge of the European offer is quality. As the EU, we can deliver longer-term, sustainable infrastructure investments, promoting social and green progress at another level than our geopolitical competitors. But it's of course up to our partners to judge us on our footprint, political and economic. We literally have to walk the walk. We need to mobilize investments and political engagements. Equal partnerships also mean investing in a regular and open, high-level dialogue with our partners in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, if we want to be that credible partner in the geopolitical hotspots of tomorrow's world. And it may seem from the outside that Europe is preoccupied with its own struggles and challenges. And yes, that's true to a large extent. But I think we also see a lot of activity and attention to the broader world. And as partners, those of you coming from abroad, please help us, remind us to do that. That's what our presidency will try to continue to stimulate and improve. So on that note, on that happy and hopeful note, I wish you a insightful afternoon. And the topic of today's conference is extremely important, as you can hear from my few words. Thank you.
Let's, on top of this very, very interesting point of view, also from the Danish government and Danish presidency, let's have a debate. Let's find out, how does the EU's linking of development cooperation to other policy areas affect the equal partnerships? What do we gain from this? And by we, I mean everyone. And do we indeed achieve the goals set to support both EU interests and in a changing and insecure global situation and the interests of the partner country? So please join me, my beloved panel. Please come closer. You all have a microphone on. I think I would like to invite here to the stage Domenico Rosa, Head of Unit for the Strategic Partnerships in the European Commission, Mr. Kjetil Carlsen, Head of Africa in the Development Policy meeting now. It's very nice. And financing under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Halima Noyota, who is coming up.
Shall we split in?
Founder and Executive Director of the organization Rising to Greatness, a non-profit young women-led community-based organizations located in Kenya, as we say in Danish, and Mayela Dikiomo, who is a senior policy analyst for the independent Think and Do tank, I noticed on your website, ECDPM, the European Center.
Well done for pronouncing it correctly.
Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes.
I've been practicing all of your names. So let's give them a warm welcome, shall we? And like I said before, we'll begin the debate. We'll hear some statements from you and have some conversation up here. And then we'll open for questions or even remarks, as long as they're not too long and are followed by a question, perhaps, a little further down in the debate. But let us begin with you, Domenico Rosa. You have been listening to a lot of things about the European Union and what is going on in your department. And you are what one might call a seasoned, right? A seasoned EU official. You have been a member of the cabinet of the past two commissions, and you are very experienced in this area, right?
Yeah.
So, having listened to everything that has been said about your work and the institution that you work for, and having also been preparing for today some answers to and some comments to that, one of the most oftenly asked questions to you must be, what's the point of all this? Can you give us your best example of why this is a good idea to combine these policy areas? That was a very long question.
Well, definitely, I think that this morning there were many elements that have been put forward by the different panelists and in particular by the keynote speaker, Madame Touré. Well, my impression, I have the impression that in the end, there is a kind of intellectual bias against the European Union. So whatever we do things, we don't do good, or sometimes we are doing good, but we could do better, and so on. So I think that, first of all, I would like that at some point, we should start here in Europe just to be a little bit more fair, I would say. We are not acting in a context that is very easy. And many of, I think, and context is even more difficult now compared to a few years ago. First of all, because, well, we have new actors that are entering into the market in Africa, and there is China that was mentioned, but you cannot forget India, the Emirates, Turkey, in the past even in the security sector, a little bit Russia, a little bit less now. And then I think that with the wars and the COVID, I think that we realized that some key economic dependencies that were existing before turned for us into real geopolitical vulnerability. And I think that from this point, starting point, the idea was, when we launched this idea of having the global gateway, not only for Africa, but for the rest of the world, to create sufficient autonomy for Europe, but at the same time create autonomy for the other partners, according to a rule-based system, according to clear and understandable, I would say, rules. And of course, this is something that need to be built compared to the old way of doing development cooperation. A second element is that official development assistance is irrelevant. It can be a lot of money, but it's not the ODA that is changing the situation on the ground. And therefore, how to use these, I would say, seed funds, if I may way, that are coming from the development cooperation in order to magnify the impact that the European Union can have on the ground. And this is why I think there was the idea, first of all, in changing a little bit the way we were functioning, and use this money in order to try to attract as much as possible other international financial institutions, private sector, that I think is fundamental if we want to manage to have a transformational impact on the ground, and of course in mobilizing all the different EU member states. We are not a country, EU is not a country, we are 27, and we have to try to find each time, I would say, minimal and common denominators when we are proposing something outside. It was true, in 2022 we proposed a global strategy for Africa, and now we are seeing popping in all different countries new strategy for Africa. I don't want to say that our strategy for Africa was the best, but in a way was trying to create an European approach in the different areas that we considered were critical. And so the last 2 points, in order to try to use all the firepower of the European Union, we try to, first of all, to change our instrument in order to use ODAs or grants, in order to having guarantees that should, I would say, in a way, alleviate a little bit the cost of loans in Africa, so it take part of the risk by public funds.
We're speaking directly
Well,
to you
it
now.
was something that was, I know that President Macky Sall was one of the big fighters for having an African credit rating agency. This one. The second is to try to use a 360-degree approach in order to create the condition for the private sector that want to invest on its own in Africa could find the condition for a proper investment. I'll just give you an example. There was this criticism about vaccines at some point. That, by the way, we managed to distribute all the vaccine. I don't know where the vaccine ended, because in many countries there was a problem not of receiving vaccine, but to organize a proper vaccination campaign. So we decided, okay, as an example, European Union is going to support production of vaccine and medicine in Africa. And we started with, I would say, some pilot cases, Rwanda, Ghana, and Senegal. In Rwanda, they are producing the first vaccine produced in Africa, and that's fine. But one thing is producing vaccine, and then the problem is that you need to be able to sell the vaccine in the other countries. And for this, what you have to do, you have to create something like the European Medicine Agency, and the African Union create, with our support, the African Medicine Agency in order to have the authorization to sell on different markets the vaccine, and also to have a kind of European control disease center, the African CDC, that was, I would say, instrumental recently in containing the Marburg epidemic in Central Africa. So you see, and this is what we call the 360-degree in terms of institutional stuff. But also, when you have a laboratory on the ground, you need technical staff. And this is why there are now, I would say, agreement between universities in order to create or to produce the technical staff that is needed in Kigali to produce vaccines.
So what you're saying is be patient,
cut us some slack. The EU is 27 countries, and we tend to overlook what is actually some of the positive development that has been.
Just one point, if I may. We published in May 2020, this year, at the occasion of the African Union European Ministerial, a monitoring report on the commitment undertaken in 2022 at the latest summit with the African Union. And definitely, you can, if you go through the report, we walk the talk. I think that the situation is much more positive, but there is always this idea of saying, Europe is not doing enough. Europe is not doing as sufficiently fast, and so on. But so this is
you walk the walk with very tiny steps.
Absolutely.
Right. Got it. Thank you. We'll come back to you. But Mariella Di Chiomo, as you're the analyst, right? You have all the facts. You have all the facts. We can ask you, how are things actually going? But what would be your response to what you have heard about the strategy, linking the strategies and the examples, pro and cons and so on, from both Mr. Rosa and the rest of the speakers?
Yeah, I think it's undoubtful that Europe is contributing to development. I was looking at the number this morning, and I think when we bring ODA together collectively, we are talking around 90+ billion of euros per year. Of course, we can use that better, but I also don't think this is necessarily the point. I don't think the point is necessarily addressing the question in terms of competition and what others do more or better than us. It is actually, for me, an issue of balance. And the balance comes from at least 2 points. One point is, Ukraine is, of course, fundamental to European and Denmark security. We have the council going on tomorrow and on Thursday, exactly in the same city, and we know all the concerns that exist around that. So I don't think this is something easy to discount. However, I think we have to walk the talk in very concrete ways that other countries in the world, including countries in Africa, matter for Europe. Concretely, they matter for European prosperity, they matter for European security. We are interconnected. And the thing is, we have to find the balance between the financial means that we spend in some areas and the political will that you are able to express in some areas, with the political will and the financial means that we express for other parts of the world. This is one element. And I think this is also what we were talking this morning about Gaza, for example, but we also have Sudan, we also have the DRC, we also have the Sahel. No? And I think our commitment to these other parts of the world also matter. The other element that I want to bring to the table is another level of balance, which is we have, of course, to defend and protect our interest. It is, of course, come time that we have to internationalize our companies more. But I think we risk framing partners as arenas of rivalry if we keep talking about China as a competitor, only as a competitor. African countries actually combine, Chinese extracted minerals with European railways. This is the case of the Lobito corridor, for example, that runs through Angola, the DRC, and potentially Zambia. It is the case of Ethiopia. Denmark, Germany, the European Union, and I think Spain have all together built the Asela wind farm in Ethiopia. China has built the Grand Renaissance Dam for the same purpose of giving electricity to people. So why the perspective is one of competition? Well, actually, the challenge is how to find ways to align Europe with what Europe wants, with what partner wants. And I think on the point I wanted to pick up of the point of this morning made on industrial development in Africa, and I think this is essential because actually industrial development in Africa will help Europe to become more autonomous, more strategic, and more able to secure its own value chains. So the matter is not what we do more or less in comparison to others, but how do we meet partners where they are.
Do you see partner countries suffering from this strategy of the EU? Or certain areas suffering, perhaps?
You mean in terms of how the EU has been framing its own? I think the reality is it really depends on the country. For example, some work that we have done if you take a country like Morocco, for example, a country like Morocco is a country which has been very able to navigate geopolitics well. Why? Because it has access to the American market, it has access to the European market, it welcomes investments basically from the Gulf, from China, from Europe. So it has, and it has a vision, for example, around becoming a green hub in Africa. Other countries have been less able to do that. So it also comes down to what capacities countries have to adapt. Another point that I was making earlier today is also how we ourselves communicate our own changes. One of the struggles that African partners have, I was to Angola earlier this year, is what is happening and investing ourselves the time to engage with our partners, to explain how we are changing not only the framing in our politics, but the instruments. What is changing there? What is possible to do there? And I very much welcome, by the way, this idea that EU is making itself better equipped, and Denmark as well is making itself better equipped to mobilize private resources for development. But ODA is still very important because it is a resource that it's not seeking a profit. And I think this is something it would be like to say that the public budget doesn't serve a purpose. And I don't think we can go there. But I see the moderator wants to stop me.
Halima, I'll jump to you in a second, but I'd like also the Danish perspective before we give you the word as well. Mr. Ketil Carlsen, the Danish presidency, Denmark has a long tradition of working with developing organizations, countries, so on. How is that implemented in the Danish presidency of the EU in this area?
Thank you very much, Mette, and good afternoon, everyone. Madame Touré, lovely to meet you here. Good to have you. I would have hoped to have a couple of hours to answer that question because, as some of you know, we have just been going through some very fascinating strategy processes where we did a lot of hard thinking about, how should we position ourselves in the current state of play. But I will try to be very brief and to the point. Okay, so a lot has been said already. There is a shifting geopolitical stage. I very much agree with Domenico that those times where we just looked at the West against China and Russia in an African setting, for instance, those times are long gone. If you are in diplomatic circles, look at Turkey, opening up now more than 40 embassies across the continent. India recently announced 18 new diplomatic presences. And at the same time, looking at the US, that traditional partner of ours, I was in touch with an American ambassador the other day. I'm not going to say which country it was. It is a medium-sized Western African country, and then you'll do the math.
Okay, no one can listen to another word you're saying because we're all guessing what country you're talking about.
where they are reducing their staff from 160 people working at the embassy with development aid to 20. So, this is not to say that the shifting diplomatic landscape is determining the playing ground on its own, but it is quite telling, isn't it? In terms of very significant changes, and at the same time, new spaces that are opened up. And even when I was EU ambassador a few years back, we talked about occupying the space as the European Union. That was around the time when Trump was at the helm the first time around. And it's like we haven't really found the right recipe to do that. I mean, everything fits on paper and strategies are easier to write than to implement. I agree very much with Mariela that, our partner countries, they don't want to choose between us and the others. They don't. They want to sit on the fence. When you think of it, that's exactly what we do ourselves. We've always done that. We want to be able to engage with China, and we want to be able to engage with India, all while being a close partner of the US and beyond. So why should we expect anything different from our partners in the global south, in lack of a better word? So doing things from a Danish perspective, of course, we need to be painfully aware, even if it's not in our nature, that we are a small country, right? There's only so much we can achieve on our own. When I was in Nigeria, I always said, hold it, I'm in a country that actually grows by the size of Denmark on a yearly basis, just to put things into perspective, okay? So in our strategic thinking, and this may seem like a no-brainer, but it is now coming across stronger than ever before. We understand that we need to do things as part of the EU, not together with the EU, because we are the EU, but together with the EU. But even the EU will be surpassed by the population of Nigeria within a couple of decades, just to put that into perspective. So we need maybe to be a bit more humble without throwing ourselves under the bus. I agree with everything said. We are the biggest trading partner, the biggest developing partner, etc. But have we really found the right way of implementing that in practice, communicating that in practice? I'm a little bit less certain of that. So as far as I'm concerned, Global Gateway is actually the entirely right philosophy. I mean, I don't disagree with anything there, and to a certain extent, it has inspired, our own strategies. I'll have to. There's some. You can claim some intellectual property rights. I'm sure, for some of the wording in our own strategy. But if I can be a bit provocative, Domenico, it's also a bit of an afterthought. It's sometimes in politics, it's like putting the shoes on first and then the socks afterward. Because did we really get in place the right architecture to deliver on this in practice? Did we get in place the right budget to deliver on this in practice? And then you risk running into, promises that are difficult to keep. When at the last EU-AU summit in 2022, the European Union, signaled 150 billion euros in Global Gateway projects across the African continent. Of course, our African partners are going to hold us responsible to that promise when we meet again in November in Angola. We would rather that the conversation is about forward-looking now, and that is coming back to the Danish presidency, where we are starting to negotiate the new multi-annual financial framework, the new global Europe architecture, so that we get the philosophy and the instruments fitting together. And I think if we do that, then we have a new power tool in the toolbox that can hopefully change things. But again, and this has been stated before, and it also flows in our own strategic thinking, this only makes sense if we look beyond development cooperation. Development cooperation is dropping globally. There are only 4 countries left. Denmark is one of them that provides 0.7% of GNI in development cooperation, right? Even looking around our own neighborhood, development cooperation is dropping while the financial gap is increasing. So we need to be smarter about how we leverage funding. We need to use leveraging of funding and inclusion of private sector as a filter for how we do development cooperation. And then we need to be able to explain those that are not in this room, with all due respect, because I see all the usual suspects here, and you will find your own wordings in the strategies as well. The ordinary Danes out there, why it matters to them, at times where the hybrid war is taking place and, the world is changing so rapidly. Why is it in their interest that we invest through development cooperation? Because that's the only way that we can also safeguard, the very important strategic partnership building that is taking place in the long term.
Thank you, Ketil.
Not so brief.
Not so brief, but then again, but interesting. Thank you. Halima, having listened to all of this and having heard the voice of one of, I would think, political idols, maybe even I would certainly feel that way if I was young and your age and living in Africa. Never mind. But what is your conception of all this? Ketil just said promises difficult to keep. I think that's a very frank way of saying it, right? Is that with your eyes and speaking for the African youth? You also earlier said that the African youth are disappointed with the EU. How do you look upon the situation?
Okay, first of all, thanks for this opportunity. I will remind you my name. I'm Halima Nyota. Nyota means star, from Kenya. First of all, I I wouldn't want to water down the development contribution that EU has had on the African continent. That is something that we must appreciate the effort and acknowledge the support so far. But by and large, we have had traditional aid development kind of relationship between the Africa continent and the European Union region. And for about 32 years, we are still in the question of ending poverty, promoting sustainability among the developing countries. And we are still here. We are having socioeconomical imbalances and inequalities across the region. And the biggest question we ask, if the change we are envisioning is not changing, what are we not doing right? Because it is 32 years plus, and we're still having injustices within the young generation, the young African continent. We are still facing the struggles to socioeconomic and political rights that majority of the young Africans are still struggling to access food, health, shelter, which is the most pressing need that a human being cannot afford to have a discussion on and to bargain on. That being said, we have seen the organizing of the African youth, that we are being upfront in catalyzing transformational political change. This to say that African youth remains key in setting the agenda and priorities upon which their governments are going to engage. And you cannot afford to fail to listen to them. And for the past 25 years, the African youth population, which is growing and growing, and I'm sure that Her Excellency Aminata has been able to allude to, it is this transformation that is going to shape the continent, but it's also going to shape the political discussion and economic and socioeconomic trajectories. But in total reality, for the relationship the African continent has had with the European countries, it is with the assumption that it is more of transactional, that looks at prioritizing the interests and the needs of EU than the African continent. And that in itself widens the gaps of inequality, injustices within the continent. Because if you're having a collaboration with a country that continuously perpetuates abuse against its own citizens, and you're calling yourself to promote democracy, the young people will question that level of democracy. If you're having a partnership with a country that corruption is their way of life, and that in itself continues to reinforce injustices against its women, its children, and its youngest potential generation, and that partnership is still going on without questioning the existing systems, the existing social, structural systems that continue to perpetuate this thing, the young people are going to wake up, and fortunate enough, we are waking up and questioning, giving the right question. That in concern, it tells us that in this collaboration, in this partnership that we're envisioning to continue building, the voices of the young people cannot be ignored. The voices of women cannot be ignored, because we're going to ask the right question, and when answers are not provided, we will take action. I will pause it there.
Mm-hmm. So when you hear, and you heard also this morning, a lot of the speakers talking about, and you, I know, Ketil, because you told me that when we spoke on the phone, that I quote you now, if we are to succeed with idealism, we need to be pragmatic. You recognize those words as your own as well, right?
It's rather paraphrasing my minister.
Okay, fair enough.
Of intellectual
I thought you were
property, right?
talking as Ketil and you were talking as your minister. Fair enough. I forget sometimes. I'm sorry. But Halima, how do you? What is that concept to you, saying that we need to be pragmatic?
I'm looking at it in two perspectives. Partnership that goes beyond personal interest in the first place, because first of all, we are human being and we have self-needs. And in this collaboration, we are having a conversation that EU is looking forward to defend and protect the rights of its citizens and deliver their intention as to why they exist. But also as a continent, we are coming in, speaking for Africa, one, we have the demographic advantage that in terms of youth population, that EU may want to consider leveraging on at some point. But also we have the natural resources. And this is a conversation, very intense conversation that most of the time we do not want to have genuine questioning around it, because why, in our partnership, why are we having the most minerals and still the poorest continent? We actually rich than the rest of the world, but still struggling to meet our daily needs. So in terms of pragmatism, we need to go yonder and critically ask the right questions, and I think to the right people, and be able to generate, co-create interventions at the end of the day, so that we do not have a master-servant kind of relationship that has been in the court, the tradition. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I'm looking at the geopolitical advantage when EU and AU join solidarity. And Her Excellency, again, I'm quoting you, and I think you wanted me to quote her at the end of the day, did reinforce that in terms of geographical advantage, we are neighbors, literally, separated by probably just waters. We have the resources, we have the expertise, and when you're talking about the concern around migration, at what level does European Union say that they want intellectual minds from Africa to come to Europe, and at a certain point say that young people fleeing from conflict, from wars, from violence, coming to survive in Europe, they have to be controlled. So that double standard and the pragmatism is to be able to put the exact matrix that looks at this coin in the two lens and not provide a single-handed intervention that is going to discriminate at some point, exploit in terms of the question of resources and the exploitation around it. And then lastly, we will be able to look at having a relationship that is founded on each other's agency, relooking at the mutual respect that everybody is having a conversation in here, and lastly, appreciating both the burden and the benefit that each and every stakeholder is bringing to the table.
So, Domenico, how do we, in terms of equal partnerships, how do we make Halima and her young friends, how do we make them take us seriously? I mean, maybe pragmatism and idealism can exist hand in hand. I sure do hope so, because otherwise I don't know what we're going to do. But how can the EU improve these equal partnerships so that she can look you into the eyes and say, not only thank you very much for a nice debate, but I respect the work you're doing. That's what she can.
So, no, thank you. I think that, this question of also of equal partnership is also a little bit a kind of myth in a way, in the sense that...
a kind of what?
Myth.
Myth, yeah.
In the sense that the situation, the starting point is too far, I would say, to talk about equal partnership in itself. So I think that...
So you don't really mean it when you say it?
No, well, this is my personal opinion.
Yes,
sometimes, then of course, there is, I would say, the public speaking where you have to talk about equal. You cannot talk about unequal partnership because this wouldn't fly at all. So I think that this should be the objective in a way, or the target in the long run. It's clear that we can get there progressively. I think that it's not always easy, for instance, to bring the youth to the table. I had example in the past, in particular with the African Union, that was practically impossible to bring the youth and the civil society to the table. Things are improving slightly, but they are improving. And of course, it's not easy. But for us, for instance, during the latest African Union, European Union ministerial, we managed to have youth and civil society and to present the conclusion of the work a few days before to the ministers. That is a first step. Of course, they must be much more involved in the agenda setting, I would say. But I don't think that the mechanisms are yet there and that they are functioning in a proper way to bring, I would say, sufficiently representative voices of the youth and the civil society and women.
Have you invited them?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Good start.
It's a small sample, but
Yes,
we
yes,
hope
yes.
that
Yeah.
could be represented.
So, Mariella, equal partnership is perhaps a myth, but has it become, what does the statistics show us? Is it a more equal partnership now with the new EU strategy, or is it worse?
I have to be with Domenico on this. I think
It is allowed. It is
through
allowed.
through some work we can sometimes agree.
Yeah. You're surprised yourself, but you do agree with it. Yeah.
It is difficult in a way. I think for example, I've done some work on the Africa Partnership in the past with another colleague of mine, and what we came out was this idea that we can achieve a more balanced relationship. Now, there is the issue of trust, but actually states have interests in the end of the day. And this is what you have to take into account, especially now. So I feel that there is this space in which we have to take our partners seriously, around issues like migration, around local value addition, around industrialization, around where they stand on climate change. For example, some of the imports that was mentioned this morning on solar panels, or some of the shifts, for example, to EV vehicles in Ethiopia, are driven by macroeconomic concerns, in particular managing dependence on external currency and currency fluctuation, rather than considerations around climate change. People buy more solar panels in South Africa because they want to have stable access to energy and they want to reduce costs. So we also have to understand that our partners, we can come to the same perspective and to the same objective, but actually coming from a very different place. I think this is the sort of discussions that we have to have a more balanced relationship. Of course, there are issues of capacities in Africa, and I think Europe can do something on that, but I want to stress that we also have to put a bit our house in order. And I think it comes around maybe at least two elements. One is delivery. I think we have to show that we are delivering. Global Gateway is taking place. I think there has been work in defining what the flagships are. There are, these elements are getting a bit more defined. The discussion around the future budget will be a big one, but I want to go back to that later. But it's one of the discussions, most consequential processes in the EU, where the instruments to deliver on these strategies are set, not only the amounts, but the how you do this. And there is the big issue that it is an institutional issue in Europe, which is around coordination. We want to do trade. We want to do international cooperation. We want to work on shared competencies. We want to do economic diplomacy. How do we bring all of this together in a comprehensive and sustainable way? How can we talk the same language? And this is an issue of the overarching political and policy framework that governs the EU today, but it is also an issue of the institutional setup that exists today in the EU.
So let me just, Kizil, I'd like to bring, and then you, of course, Halima, but I'd like to ask you, Kizil, so if is this all not only a myth, but an illusion? Because if we're saying that we're shifting because of geopolitics, we're shifting towards trade and security, right? How can we ever be equally, how can we balance equality if we don't spend any money on trying to lift, for example, the voice of the African youth? How is that possible?
All right, so it's a super important question. How do we define equal partnerships, right? Because we talk of it, but do we actually bother to say what we mean? And it's almost sort of an oxymoron situation, that there's a contradiction, that you talk of something, and by talking about it, you know, say in a
Like a
sense that
unicorn,
it's not,
more or less.
that is not there. But I think the main point here is to have a proper dialogue with our partners about what does this mean to you? Okay, so whether it is so or not is maybe not that important, as a matter of fact. And if you dare to ask that question, you may find some unpleasant answers as well from time to time, you know. When we had, tomorrow I'm heading to Zimbabwe for the Nordic African Foreign Ministers meeting. Last year we had it just a few hundred meters down the road here in Copenhagen, where we had this conversation with the 30 plus African foreign ministers that came. And they said, and this is the only thing where I slightly disagree with my African sister here next to me. Actually, they say, you know, being transactional is also a question of being equal, because there's some honesty in that. You know, declaring our interest and you declaring your interest is also a definition of equality. You know, and not just viewing us as countries where you operate with development cooperation, but where you actually fundamentally shift towards engaging with trade and investment, where you have proper political conversations about, you know, the things that unite African countries and European countries these days. I mean, let's face it, we are, most of us, small or medium-sized countries that even combined have a difficulty pulling our full weight. And you know, in the global world order of today, we have a shared interest in having a rules-based order, that there's something called the UN tomorrow as well, etc. So when we ask our partners, that is actually what they are telling us. That's how they are defining, you know, having equal partnerships. So maybe we need to work on that. So how do we deliver that? So we are trying to revamp our strategic partnerships with our partner countries, again, in lack of a better word, in the global south, to look at a vast array of different tools and instruments. And development cooperation is part of it, but it's supportive of other political ambitions, you know, where we find commonalities in our interests. So I think that's the conversation that we need to have, you know, asking our partners, what does a good partnership mean to you?
I'll open the floor in just after Halima has had made her comment, and then so you can start phrasing in your head the best question that has ever been asked to our panel. So, but Halima, you have listened to these, and you must have a lot of thoughts in your head.
Yeah, absolutely.
You must have a lot of words that need to get out. So what's your response?
I think in my earlier response, I did mention the conversation of shared burden versus shared benefits. And at some point when you're having conversations of equal partnership, we think that Africa as a continent is going to sit at the fence and wait to harvest. I believe that is not the case. At some point, we come with a mind of funding and resources and money, money is a good thing. Everybody wants money anyway. But ideally, when we're having conversation of equal partnership, we have to have genuine, honest, and critical conversation in terms of what is your value as a continent, as a country, versus what is my value. And within that agreement, we ensure that at the end of the day, that agreement is implemented to the letter and there are no shortfalls in it. And we're having conversation of the top-down kind of collaboration and kind of partnership, which is, I believe, is the major challenge at the end of the day. That look at the existing researches that exist in my continent. Most of them have been borrowed from the European region. And we are not blaming. But have we ever asked ourselves what would have been the most ideal thing for a young person in my village sitting down and co-creating what is the best solution to their problem because they have their lived realities, they have their needs, and they can use that to shape a more long-lasting intervention. The major thing, not just with the government institutions, but even within the civil society sector, it is sitting down and dreaming about something and saying, this community is facing hunger. I believe when I go with this intervention, it is gonna sort it out. And if we have to achieve change, which everybody is looking forward to, there is nothing as fulfilling as waking up and knowing that you have been part of the EU strategy or EU strategy. It is very fulfilling. It is more fulfilling to wake up and say that through your innovation, you've saved 100 and 1,000 lives at the end of the day. But in that moment, the critical analysis should putting communities at the center of this conversation. And my colleague said that it is very difficult. The approach is what makes it difficult. The approach of who are you asking the questions and who is giving you the answers. And of course, sometimes we will say you cannot get to everybody, but we can put up a mechanism that includes everybody. I know the Danish government has an advisory, the Danish advisory, I don't know the exact word, where it brings together different young people with different lived experiences.
Youth panel.
Okay, it is the Danish advisory youth panel, sitting together to share and co-create intervention. And I'm not saying that you should get 1 billion young people from Africa. You need 3, 5, 10 who are gonna give you the lived realities and be able to help you co-create your strategy, which is going, one, to speak to the existing needs. And if somebody helps you to meet their needs, you've solved a problem. And at the end of the day, as I purpose to land, we are talking about sustainability. And right now, organizations will tell you that the question around shrinking donor funding, and nobody's going to talk about that, and how most global South countries are going to depend probably to the EU and the West in terms of funding. But as an organization, we have been very intentional to rethinking all this out. We are talking about communities with more than enough resources, communities with land, communities with free access to natural water. But also the bigger burden is questioning what is the ideal material, what is the ideal wealth, what is the ideal resources from what these communities have. And if we're able to rethink in terms of changing the mindset and allow communities shape their ideal sustainable change, that is how we will put them at the center of this conversation. And we can even document success stories on what is working best somewhere so that it becomes a model learning. And lastly, as I purpose to land again, in terms of research,
yeah, briefly, and then we'll take some questions. Yes.
Briefly, I'll be as short as my height, don't worry.
That's a bit too short, perhaps.
Yeah. In terms of research, have we thought about having community-centered research at the end of the day? And that is an opportunity that I may want to open up to each and every person seated in this room. That instead of us going to the community with gadgets and filling up surveys, we have a shared collaboration that we can have exchange learning between AU and EU at both lens, not one depending on the other, but also getting to a level where we can share experiences and a touch on how life looks like in all these regions. And that exchange learning is an opportunity that we can leverage on as a region. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Many questions. I think were you the first to raise your hand? We have the microphone over here. You're not getting the microphone because there is a small risk that you're not going to give it away as well afterwards. Okay. So we're holding the microphone for also to ensure that it's in the right angle. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Philip, and I'm involved with a couple of other people on a study on how developing is delivered from the EU jointly with Denmark and other member countries. And I spoke with you, Ketil, the other day. You might remember that. So the idea is that we have the new idea with Team Europe and global getaway and a lot of funding. Why are you laughing?
You said global getaway.
Global getaway, yeah. But I think you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, so we have I hope, new ways to deliver development from the member states and from the EU. So the question was actually, so how can we do that better together? How can we make approaches and the member states and the EU are delivering, European Commission are delivering together, including these ideas with indirect management, where we're actually finding out which countries that are best to deliver and where member state countries can deliver on behalf of the EU or jointly with the EU in different approaches. So that was actually my question. Thank you very much for the
Domenico, do you want
presentation.
to give a reply?
No. Don't.
Well, the question of the TI was definitely one of the answers that we tried to put on the table in order to reduce fragmentation. We are trying to reduce fragmentation since 30 years, more or less. And each time we call it in another way. So the last package is the Team Europe. And I think that definitely is working. It's working better than before when we did some attempt in order to reduce fragmentation. It's clear that the TI is, each TI is different because of the number of member states, because of the governing structure and so on. But I think what is important is that the TI has a common objective, and what is important is that TI delivers on the objective. Then, you know that, of course, we have a question of indirect management with practically all the national development agency of our member states. And of course, this is the way we tend to work. Although sometimes I have the impression that we lose a little bit the EU dimension because it's becoming more German, more Sweden, more France, and so on. So I think that we have to be careful, but I think that definitely there is work for everybody. And I would say if we manage to have a division of labor among 27 member states plus the EU and so on the TI, this could be the answer for the future.
Any brief comments on that, Ketil? Yes.
Okay, I'll try to be super brief. So I mean, we are making this a priority. So we are telling our embassies, be willing to swallow extra transactional costs to demonstrate that we can work with delegated cooperation with the EU, both ways. I mean, we fund EU delegations and vice versa. But we need to work a bit on bureaucracy there. And then, I mean, coming back to Mariela's point, and I see some representatives of the business sector in the room as well, we need to solve the conundrum as well that, you know, it becomes European funding of Chinese technology in the countries.
What do you do there?
You know, we need to become better at linking up, you know, what we are funding with European business interests as well.
Okay, briefly, and then we'll have a lot of questions.
If not just a comment on this last point that is common to both. I think that sometimes we have a wrong objective in the sense that, of course, on solar panel, we lost the war and the battle. They will be Chinese. But Europe has plenty of, I would say, best technology. We are, I would say, at the forefront in terms of greening on how to use this panel in the best way. So I think that we have to rethink a little bit better where are our interests and where we can have an added value compared to the competitors.
Okay, we have two questions here. We have one over here and one over here. So we're speeding up now. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is John Onoha, and I'm representing Europe Dialogue. Halima, thank you very much for your wonderful submissions. I just want to add that I don't want us to continue to blame Europe for our problem as a continent. I think it's time for us as Africans to wake up and get up and compete equally. And somebody also said we should begin to ask the right questions. And in asking the right question, I want to ask the EU representative here, who are you partnering with in Africa? Who are your partners? Are you partnering with our corrupt politicians that...
I would say no if I were you. I would say no. I would say no.
Because that is the problem we are facing. Like Halima said, she's not going to water down the, we have received a lot of funding from Europe, and that is the truth. But the truth is that, the right question is, where is the funding going to? Why are we not feeling the impacts of most of those funds that is coming to Africa? So the truth is that you have to begin to look at who your partners are, because if you are going to build partnership of purpose, I think you have to adopt a different strategy, a strategy that works with the civil rights organizations in different continents in Africa, so that the hungry youths who are hungry for good governance and development can begin to feel the impact.
Okay, comments on that? Ketil, perhaps?
for the EU.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm trying to, he can talk for hours, so I'm thinking, do you have thoughts? Perhaps the Danish presidency has thoughts on that.
As a member of the EU.
But the fact of the matter is that we do work with all levels of society. So we specifically now, Adam, who was here before, was one of the persons advising us, please don't do strategies that are elitist in the sense that they are just government-to-government strategies. Mm-hmm. So if you read through our strategies, you will find that these are actually, stressing the very valid point and the importance of engagement of civil society. But civil society, not only as NGOs in the old understanding of the word, but also business sector, youth to youth. We are, it's disputed, I would say, even in the Danish political debate. But, we just launched a 430 million Danish kroner exchange program with African countries, bringing more youth to Denmark. So we are trying to open up a very wide array of different instruments to engage widely in the societies, and not only with governments as such. But that doesn't mean that we don't wish to engage in a dialogue with the government. We believe that that's the only way actually to try to influence things as well.
Mariella, would you like to comment?
It's probably a related comment in terms of where we have spoken a lot about interests, right? And the reality is that there is a whole lot of things that we have done through aid, for example, in the space of human development, in the space of values, in the space of gender equality, in the space of, for strengthening civil society. And I think one of the concerns that exist today is where all this going to go. No, and I think this is one element that speaks to this question. I think it has to be acknowledged that, going from the EU to the grassroots level, sometimes it's difficult. I think the EU has often used, and I think it is a wise choice to use mechanisms and actors that are actually better equipped to work with more local actors. And I think this is a good choice. So sometimes you also don't see the EU contribution, even if it's there. But I do, and I think this is an issue that has to be recognized. But I do feel that the bigger question that speaks to your concern is, what's gonna happen, and how do you, in a way, what are the arguments that you put on the table to still support civil society and, and other organizations?
Do you have
there are many.
Yeah, do you have a brief answer as well, since you are today?
Well,
Partly.
I fully agree on the fact that, first of all, because of historical institutional reason, our counterpart were the government, but they are in a way less and less as I would say direct beneficiary or channel through what the money is going. So I think that what is important now is that definitely the private sector can enter into the game and I would say be an active actor, because I think that the first that is interested in having I would say a play field that is even and sure and certain is the private sector. So I think that this dialogue also between private sector and government is important. And the idea, I think, of Global Gateway is to promote investment that, of course, are implemented by private sector.
Next question, please.
My name is Uwe from Europe Dialogue. Just a short question. I think you mentioned EU-AU summit. It was back in 2022, and you said Angola in November. So what to expect of this EU-AU summit this time?
All right. So listen, in 22 we did what was called Vision 2030. Okay, so there was an identification of some points of interest between the two continents. These are still valid, but times have changed not only since 22 but since February. Okay, so our hope is that we will have a revitalized dialogue demonstrating why a partnership between Europe and Africa now is more important than for a very, very long time. I mean, that's what we really hope for. And you know, some in Europe maybe need to re-practice their body language a bit, okay? to really demonstrate that they want to embrace this, that they understand that, you know, in spite of everything else, this matters to us, and it's in our own best interest, as I said initially. I think there's an awakening of that in a sense. So this is an opportunity to do that. It's going to take place at the backdrops of the G20 meeting in South Africa, which means that there is also a fair probability that you will have a high influx of the real sort of high-level heads of state from Europe. So hopefully we will not have a too ritualistic, backward-looking meeting only discussing on whether Dominico or not provided 150 billion euros in Global Gateway, but actually a discussion about, okay, how can we work together on peace and security, African solutions to African problems, having more trade and investment, having a proper, risk analysis when Danish investors and European investors engage in Africa, these sorts of things that are forward-looking and constructive and show togetherness.
Next question. I think we have two more questions and then we'll take a short.
Thank you very much. I read with concern and interest the essay of Adam Tooze in Foreign Policy recently, maybe you read it too, and it was entitled The End of Development. And it basically made one of the criticism of the Agenda 2030 that the whole hope for private or for development aid to be used as a catalyst for private investments have failed, basically. That was his point. I don't have the data, but I'm curious to hear your reflections on it. And he gave the example of the climate bonds as a catalyst for driving green investments. So I would be curious to hear if you obviously don't share the analysis that ODA can be used successfully as a catalyst for private investments. What are the shortcomings of it? What are some of the experience you've harvested with it? But also how you think that it might or might not contribute to actually poverty eradication and benefiting those most left behind. Thanks.
Can you do that briefly?
I listened to the podcast of Adam Tooze, and actually was making an even more profound critique. He was saying the SDGs are a liberal dream around which we all coalesced, and are actually, and the situation and the idea of leveraging this amount of resources was fault from the beginning, because it is actually an agenda that it is impossible to sustain in the time that we have set and with the ambitions that agenda details. So part of my heart doesn't share that assessment, although I really like him. Now, I think in terms of ODA as a catalyst for development, I think in the case of the EU, some of the issues, as I was saying before, are an issue of instruments. The EU budget simply doesn't have instruments that are able to mobilize resources from the private sector at scale for the sort of ambitions that we have. Some of these, either in terms of loans or in terms of guarantees, this system, or in terms of export credits. So all of these systems are not necessarily there and are not there at scale. This is one of the issues that actually the next budget negotiations aims to solve. And I think other countries have similar issues as well. I think there is another factor, which is European companies want to internationalize, at least some of them want, but the level of, let's say, reassurances that they need or the environment that they face are not particularly attractive. Now, some say others have succeeded more. Again, the case of China. Actually, if you look at China, you see that it's true. Chinese companies have been more successful. However, the sort of backing that they have from public banks is ginormous compared to the one that Europe has. And actually, many of the projects that they have are now in that distress as well. So the Chinese are actually learning how to do that. They've become themselves more conservative. So I don't think it is an easy conundrum to solve. Now we are all kind of learning how to manage risks and opportunities. Can I go back on another point as I have the word?
You cannot.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
really
because we
bad.
have one more question, and I'd like to bring you into the discussion, Halima. Does it make it different to you and your peers where the money come from? Private sector, private businesses, governments, the EU? I mean, is it something that concerns you?
Okay.
I know you. I didn't prepare you for this question. I know that.
At some point, it is. We do say that whoever gives you the money controls you at the end of the day.
I was thinking a little bit along that line, yes.
Yeah, whoever feeds you controls
Yes.
you. And whoever gives you the money dictates the terms of engagement. And that in itself, it is where the conversation begins. Because when you're having conversations around green energy, climate change, and with companies giving you a share of their money to support your social development work, and you're still having open conversation around climate change, which is a critical issue that some of the climate activists within my region have faced. When you're talking about the conversation of AI companies embracing issues of gender data, and at the end of the day, they're giving you job opportunities, they're providing for you job markets. So it becomes a double standard kind of conversation at the end of the day. And for me, the critical thing we have to look at, even as we hope to get the money, it is strengthening the government systems within our respective member states. Because it is the responsibility of each country to ensure access to justice and delivery of services to each and every citizen of their own. So as we continue to have a failure within member states in terms of governance, which is a very critical thing, I believe companies, private institutions may give us the money and continue to exploit us. Yeah.
Right. The time is almost up, but we have one more question. Do you have one each or just one? Okay, you're waving your hand up. Yeah, on behalf. Right. So the last question,
quick
please.
comment, but because I think...
Oh, you got to hold the microphone. That's because you're from a prime minister.
No. Mr. Carlson, I think you pose a very important question. What does unequal relationship mean? It's very concrete, actually. First of all, we have 54 countries. We don't have a permanent seat at the UN. So we would seek European Union support for a permanent position of Africa at the Security Council. That's very concrete.
Yeah.
Second, there is an initiative that is led by the Vatican on tax reform. The most unequal things is happening in the tax world, by which European companies would come in Africa, make benefit, and would pay back all their taxes to Europe. So how fair is that? So that we need to change it. And there is a debate on international tax reform. That's second. That is concrete. Huh? because that's completely unequal. You come in a country, you make money, and then you pay taxes back home. So how unfair is that? So that need to change. That's completely unequal. Third, that's the whole debate about mining and how do we divide the revenues. In many countries, up to maybe 10 years ago, countries would get less than 5% of the revenues. Because, of course, you have to deduct your investment, and of course, you blow them up, and etc. And at the end, I mean, the countries that own their own resources get nothing out of mining. That's how you get most of the countries that are, I mean, that's what Halima just alluded to. I mean, you have diamond, you have everything, but at the end, let alone corruption, which is a reality, but to be corrupted, you need to go both ways, huh?
Yeah.
Because we talk about those who get the money, but we never talk about those who give the money.
Yeah.
That's something also another discussion. So how do we deal with that?
Okay.
That's completely unequal, and let's leave it there.
But maybe 4 good examples of equality
very, very concrete.
or the lack.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that's exactly what we want. This sort of dialogue, this sort of engagement. We are working on having 2 seats for permanent seats as well for African countries at the Security Council, where we happen to be seated now. Unfortunately, we don't have as much political weight that we can make that happen in practice. But all the issues that you mentioned are the sort of things where we would like to have an honest, direct, engaged dialogue, because that's what, to me at least, defines having equal partnerships. And then hopefully, partner countries will find that they would want to opt for the long-standing, stable, predictable, rules-based engagement of the European Union and a country like Denmark. But by the end of the day, it's for the countries to decide.
True.
Yes, we want to bring finance. Finance is important. We are not, shying away from development cooperation. We have actually increased, Africa 55% of all bilateral assistance this year alone. So we have never provided more assistance ever in the Danish history. So we are not turning our backs on that. All we are saying is that we need a partnership, characterized by a much wider suite of different issues. And you mentioned quite a few of the important ones yourself.
Right. So, time is running. Thank you for a lot of very nice questions. I'm sure there are much more. But I'll give the final remark to the panel. So maybe this is when you're going to say what I stopped you from saying before. Briefly, because everyone needs a break in a few seconds, right?
I think I did my last pitch just now.
Yes, you did. You did. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that was
so,
really...
which one would... Halima, would you like to conclude on the last hour? Or give it your last remark?
Okay. We are in very challenging times that will call for competitive bargaining at the end of the day. But in all this, we need to acknowledge that human rights are at threat. And we cannot afford to sit at the bench and see it being exploited. All our strategies should recognize various human rights needs and put them at the center of its implementation, even as we explore equal partnership within our respective areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayela?
My final remark is I truly welcome that some member states like Denmark are still committed to development. It's true, it's one of the few countries that still actually meet the 0.7% of GNI.
We'll pat our back.
That is great. And I also think that the MFF proposal, so the budget, long-term European budget proposal, aims to increase resources for international partnerships. Of course, we don't know whether that will survive the negotiations, but I think it's good. What is also important is what you do with the money. And for me, the main message is meet your partners where their partners are, including on tricky things like the other global powers in the world. So, as I've said, with China, the discussion is where, when, and how you work with these powers. and where you decide not to work with them.
We'll have a complete
And what is
conference
the
on that
discussion?
issue alone, I think, yeah.
This is my future work. That's why I'm saying that. So if you want to talk about it, please come and talk to me. But and then also preserve what we consider the European added value. And some of this value is really preserving some of the things that make us a bit more special, including on things like gender equality, human development, and combining this with a more, I would say, realistic assessment of where we are at the moment politically.
Thank you, Domenico. Final remark?
It's just a comment and a remark, in the sense that in this kind of debate, we tend to make a general statement.
True.
Or Africa is composed by 55 member states, countries, and so on. So there are dynamics that are very different at bilateral level from the dynamics that we can have with the African Union. Although we push the African Union to be an actor at international level, we supported the African Union as a G20 member, and of course we are supporting the reform of international financial institution and so on in order to be more equal. The problem is that sometimes I see the discrepancy that there is between the debate and the dialogue and the discussion that we have at bilateral level compared to this, I would say, kind of generalization that is done at Africa level, as Africa was a single entity, homogeneous, and so on. So I think that at some point we will have to do also a little bit of this different differentiation in the level of analysis.
We're going to do.
Exactly,
Yes. Let's give them a big hand and say thank you very, very much, all of you. Our next guest is German. He will give us a view of the opportunities for the EU and its international partnership. And I hope you will join me in welcoming Head of Africa Department at the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, Henrik Meijer. Please, Henrik.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thanks for the warm welcome. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the 4 organizers. I am really, really impressed because coming from Germany, if you talk about the Global South and have a conference for a whole day, 2 sessions, then it gets empty. So here it's really still a rather big crowd, so that's good news. Then I'm very used to these days discussions about aid being cut. Because in Germany we are reducing our development budget, also the budget for humanitarian support. So you can imagine the discussions are really about privatization. It gets very controversial and it's heated. Here I feel it's a very constructive, positive engagement. And now I come to my dilemma. I had the whole speech prepared and all my points have basically been made throughout the day. And you started first with my great intro about Africa's population, demographic, economic, and then it continued. And lastly, I think everyone would want a second keynote from you, ex-Prime Minister Touré. So I'll try my very best, and then I look forward to the panel. Why am I standing here? I think because we, as the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, are an organization with over 100 offices around the world. We have over 20 in Africa. And where we work with trade unions, civil society, academics, feminists. So what I'll try to do is a little bit to, connect to what you did in your very first speech. So how are certain EU policies perceived and how is the EU's influence in Africa perceived? We talk about partnerships in the world. We talked a lot about Africa. I will continue with talking about Africa, but of course the Global South is bigger. So I will not use my Africa example, but I use the example of the BRICS. I mean, we're talking about 40% of global GDP and almost half of the world population. That's increasing. You pointed out this morning how the EU's population is decreasing, how our economic footprint is decreasing. So we're talking about a situation where Europe will lose drastically economic, political, and normative influence, while other parts of the world will gain in political, economic, and normative influence. And we're living in a world where what we see as disorder, or some would even say chaos, is seen by many as an opportunity to gain more influence. So I think, I don't know how it is in Denmark, but in Germany, if you talk about multipolarity, people shiver and don't know what this really means. Whereas when I travel to African countries, multipolarity is seen as an emancipation from something. So that's a little bit the context where we operating in. So how do we then ensure partnerships in a more fragmented world? Do we really, as a EU, get these partnerships by focusing on narrow transactional interest or by other interests? And I think this discussion has already been going on for the whole day. My first point is, and I come from Germany, which is not a big country, but it's a little bigger than Denmark, but it's still, luckily, not a great power. So Europe and Africa share one common feature, and that's it has 83 small to medium-sized countries. I hate to say Nigeria is a medium-sized country if you think about the population, but it's like both continents do not have a power that can shape events in other continents singularly. And I think that really provides a joint interest in a reliable rules-based order. But I almost cannot listen to people talk about the rules-based order anymore, because I don't know what that means. Because the rules were not made by everyone, and many people expect these rules to be reformed. So I think we really need to focus on multilateralism that delivers for people, and it's not just an abstract concept. So that will be my first point, and I'll go into detail. My second point is our influence as Europe is probably we're not gonna outsmart the Chinese by being super transactional. I think they're just better at it. And maybe the US is better at it. So what does Europe have to offer? How do we ensure partnerships that work for Europe, but that do not, get rid of our values? And sometimes I'm worried that some people would really only want to talk about geopolitics and business interest and really mistake that for European interest as a whole. So I think that's important. So I already talked about our joint interest in this multilateral order. And I really want to get a little bit more down to this. We have two continents that are basically not able to shape events in other continents. And that is something that Europe has to get used to, because Europe used to be able to shape. We heard about slavery, we heard about the colonial times, but I was the country director of FES in South Sudan in 2016. So this is not long ago, this was 9 years ago. And in South Sudan, when war broke out, people expected the Troika to facilitate a peace process. Who was the Troika? Norway, UK, US. So fast forward 9 years later, we have a war in Sudan, and there's no Troika. So what we see there is really a losing European influence. We have special envoys, we have American, European, even German special envoys, but they're not really able to shape events anymore. So this is new. On the other hand, we have an African continent where some leaders claim and want to have an influence when it comes to shaping events in other continents. So I don't know whether it made news in Denmark, but in June 2023, there was an African Peace Summit, a delegation traveling to Ukraine and Russia to try to facilitate. And there were a lot of people say, like, what can come out of it? But if you think about it, African and probably Latin American heads of states were the only ones that were actively talking to both sides. So I wonder how in a new world we'll make use of this ambition and not just, disregard it. I already talked about how multipolarity is seen not as a threat, but something that is, very much welcomed. I think also many African countries are very good at multipolarity. Multipolarity is not new for most. It's new for us, probably. We're late to the party, but multipolarity is not new for the global majority. So, probably ever since the global financial crisis in 2008, other partners of the African continent arrived and made their offer, and Europe was not making a new offer. So, now we're late to the party with offering infrastructure, but for a while, for almost 10 years, there was only the Chinese offering infrastructure. So this is really something new. And let me come to one of, what I really believe we will have to get used to is you will, in this world, in this multipolar world, with the multilateral system that we have, you will not get alliances like we used to get them. You will get them on certain topics for a more flexible and pragmatic ways of working together. And that will probably be the new modus operandi of a multipolar world. So let me make an example. I feel Europe should make an offer to African countries to curb illicit financial flows from the African continent. That's 90 billion US dollars. And you earlier today talked about debt. Why is Europe not the champion in resolving the debt crisis in African countries? The Chinese are not very good at helping resolve the debt crisis. So these are the theme, pick a theme, pick an alliance, work with different countries, and that is probably a multilateralism that delivers for countries and not as just an abstract concept. So I feel this would be important, but here I wonder whether Europe has the instruments. I don't think the global gateway is it. It's great, we should have it. I'm not doubting that. But is that really our only instrument, or do we have others in store? And let me say one probably slightly controversial thing. In lots of parts of Africa, when we say Europe, people see France. So sometimes being the EU is not the best proposition. Sometimes the best proposition is having one EU partner country take the lead, probably with others, and then, kind of represent the EU and take it along. Not divide it, but take it along. I don't know, but our offices in the Sahel and West Africa have a very, if you say EU, people on the streets will know what you mean, and that's not very popular. And if you look at data, who's popular on the African continent, it's not necessarily individual EU countries. The EU is somehow popular, but the Chinese are popular. Even the US is popular in some ways. So we have to be a bit more creative and become more popular. And one of the earlier speakers on this panel, I want to make one example when I talk about thematic alliances. I mentioned illicit financial flows. What about, real big regional crisis? Where I sit, one of the most worrying things for Europe should be what is happening in the Horn of Africa. So this is a region where every third container ship went through. There is war everywhere, at least in 4 countries, probably 5. The 6th one about to break out. We have no broker. We have middle powers weighing in. And there's no initiative to resolve it, quite frankly. I know there's ideas about infrastructure for peace, having the global gateway kind of facilitate economic integration, but there is really right now no one who is able to bring about peace. So I wrote a piece a few months ago where I suggested to the German government to speak to Turkey and China to use their respective leverage to, enhance stability in the Horn. People in the Foreign Office in Germany, I tell you, we're not that happy about it. Because, there sits my friend Marcus who I think recommended me. He works in the Foreign Office. Anyway, but because there was this whole, what do we do with China? Can we even cooperate in certain parts of the world? And it's like, just ask the question. The most influential NATO member in Africa is not the US, it's Turkey. So do we have formats on how to cooperate? When we partner with China in one region, does that mean we have to partner everywhere? No, of course it doesn't. But China has soldiers in the UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan and had them in Mali. So you cannot just say China is always a problem for us in Africa. It's not. It actually has leverage where we don't. Same goes for Turkey. By the way, mediated memorandum of understanding that no one expected between Ethiopia and Somalia when they were almost very close to war. So these thematic or regional new alliances, I think it's something to keep put our heads together on how to do that. The second point I want to make is, what about values? And I came here not expecting to hear so much about values. I think this is the conference where I heard the most about values outside of any kind of civil society only meeting, but it's really encouraging to hear that. I think we are facing certain dilemmas that we have to be very clear about. And that is, being I work for a social democratic foundation, so I'm a bit of a lefty. And when you're a bit of a lefty, you always criticize. You used to criticize the US for their double standards, etc. But I'm quite worried that there is no standard anymore. So you cannot even criticize someone for not upholding the double standard. So I'm very, very worried. I somehow wish the double standards came back. And, because if you don't have them, we also have a problem. I mean, look at the protests on Gaza. They use language that is very complicated concepts in international law. Why? Because you still believe by protesting something and using this concept, you use something that matters to decision makers. So if we get rid of that, it's really also a problem. That's one dilemma. The second one is that we see also in the Horn of Africa that development sometimes can mean more state capacity to wage war. You know, like Adam Tooze recently wrote this piece where he said, you know, the high point in 2015, you had the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement, and you thought, you know, this could all just go on and everyone will be happy. But now we're seeing that there is geopolitical competition. So some countries that will develop will not necessarily be our friends. That's a dilemma. How do we deal with that? And the third one is that I think in this room we all can agree the UN Security Council needs to be reformed, the G20 needs to be democratized, but democratizing the United Nations means also more power for autocrats, because 70% of people in the world live in autocracies. So how do we deal with these dilemmas? And I think this is something where I don't have a solution, but we need to be, you know, we no longer live in the world of 2015, and I think that is important to keep in mind. But here's some hopeful, I know it's a lot of doom and gloom. We are actually, when we speak to our partners in the Sahel, we are very, very confident that, you know, Russia is not just going to be the partner of choice forever for Sahelian countries. When you look at what's happening in Mali right now, it's not very, very popular what the Russians are doing among the population in these countries. So Europe should have a bit more strategic patience, because I think at the end of the day, having multiple connections in society, also having development cooperation, humanitarian assistance, is not something that others do not offer to the same extent. So I think the popularity, once it's down, it doesn't mean it will always stay down. And I think Europe has an interest in democratic stability. I mean, there was a colleague from Kenya here earlier where I spent 4 years as a country director of our office. I mean, you just could see how quickly things can change. Nepal, Madagascar these days. You know, you want to have friends also in the protest movements. And I think that's also something where Europe, I think, has an advantage that others do not have. So this is important, and I think we have now the former Prime Minister from Senegal here. So if you look at the Sahel or West Africa, Europe should have a special interest that Senegal becomes a success, because it is right now, right next to countries that we surely, I mean, we don't want people to suffer in these countries, but we cannot have an interest of those, of military governments becoming a success. So I think we should do everything to solve then Senegal's debt issue, help this government prioritize, even if we might not share every little value and, you know, iteration that we hear from this government. You know, our partners in Senegal would also love to have more women in the cabinet. But of course, who are we to judge? And let's focus and prioritize sometimes a little bit better certain values. So my last point, and maybe I'll end with this because I'm shortly arriving at my time here. I feel that fair and democratic foreign policy is smart geopolitics, because it creates the level of partnerships that you need. And I think that is Europe's example, Europe's big advantage. But it has to be less abstract. It has to focus on certain topics, on certain issues, on certain making things better. Debt crisis is one, supporting African countries to ensure that, you know, you will create economies that will not go the same way as Europe because the planet can't afford it, but then you need to make the money available to do so. So these are things to think about. And I'm actually confident that by following this path, Europe will have more partner than it now thinks it has, and for the longer term. And let's really, really, really ensure that we can, in 10 years, still complain about these double standards, because we won't get rid of them. But right now, I'm worried about the standard. Thank you.
Let's move on with the last debate of today, the next interesting, we've touched upon it, the Global Gateway. It's been mentioned a couple of times. Now let's take a closer look on the content and the effects of the Global Gateway strategy. See, we're doing the thing with the furniture, and I'm bring over here again, thank you. So the question, the overall questions now are, can the partnerships, stressed again and again as necessary and important, can they be implemented in a way that is mutually beneficial for both local communities, private sectors, and investors from different countries? What is needed for the Global Gateway to be or become, perhaps rather, a success for everyone implicated? I would like my panel to join me. Please welcome, Tanya, will you join me? Tanya Cox, Director of Concord Europe, is joining me now. Paul Okumu, Head of Secretariat Africa Platform, is welcome on the stage. Why are you being so timid, all of you? Come up and join me, please. Jesper Friis, Head of Development, Policy and Partnerships at the Confederation of the Danish Industry, and Theo Ib Larsen, Managing Director and Head of Impact Partnerships at the Impact Development Fund in Denmark. Let's give them a warm welcome, shall we? So, the ambition of the Global Gateway is, if you've forgotten, as follows: to tackle the most pressing global challenges, from fighting climate change to improving health systems and boosting competitiveness and security of global supply chains. Yeah. So, Tanya.
Oh dear.
Christian Friis Bach, the former Danish minister, said he likes the Global Gateway. He says it is a good strategy. Do you agree?
I think I would tend to agree with Kunduns, the Director General of INTPA, slightly better. It's a ship being built as it's sailing.
Okay. How does that
would you like
work?
me to explain?
Yes, please. I see a picture, but I'm not sure it's the right picture. So please elaborate a little bit better.
So it's early days to say whether the Global Gateway will have any impact or what impact it will have. So I think that we need to start from that perspective. But I think that perhaps one of the things that should be raised very early on is that the intention you have behind something is often very important in terms of the impact that you're going to get out of it. And the intention behind the Global Gateway has been said over and over again, that it is to advance the EU's interests, especially its economic interests. It's around securing things like critical raw materials. It's about ensuring opportunities for the European private sector to invest around the world, particularly in Africa, and that the benefits hopefully will be brought home in terms of economic growth and so on. So I work for Concord, and Concord is an umbrella organization of NGOs working on sustainable development. And what I'm missing in all of this is actually the real determination to achieve sustainable development and advance people's lives. So I'm glad that the EU is being clear about its intentions these days. I think that that's a very welcome improvement. But if we're looking at impact, I would want to be seeing impact for people and for the planet, and obviously that's positive impact for people and planet. Mm-hmm. And it's far too early to know whether that will actually happen. Creating local jobs was a bit of an afterthought. So we're not too sure how many local jobs will actually be created by all the investments that are going on with the private sector, European private sector. We don't know the degree to which the Global Gateway will support, for example, the systems, the country's own systems. And I think it was Halima who was referring to the importance of this, for a country to be building its society and to create this sort of compact that you have between people and the government. You need to also build the systems that support people. So we have some doubts about perhaps that, because again, that is not the intention, therefore why would it be the outcome?
And you're positive, you're certain that this is not the intention?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right.
So, I mean, it would be written down if it were. It would be talked about if it were. We're not talking about really trying to achieve impacts for local businesses or local people or local communities.
Thank you. Jesper Friis, what is written down is that the Global Gateway is financially designed to bring private companies into development projects. That's the reason why you're here today. So you should be a big fan of the Global Gateway. How many Danish businesses, companies, how many of your members are currently involved in Global Gateway projects?
Well, if we talk directly, I could say 0.
Okay.
I mean, there might be some involved in the branding strategy of Global Gateway, being involved in projects that are already going on, where it has gotten a big fat Global Gateway stamp. But Global Gateway has not come with any new funds. There's no place for companies as such to apply. They might get it through TEO, but...
TEO has a lot of money. We're coming back to that.
Yeah. You know, how we can access
and he knows
that,
where to get more. Yeah.
But in terms of the build-up of the strategy and the way the EU have managed it, it's not possible or very, very difficult for private companies to apply. I know one Danish company have tried, and they have not succeeded. It has kind of gotten stuck in the EU, as many things happen to do. So in reality, it hasn't really worked, I would say, not in involving private sector and not in achieving the branding either. But getting back to your point, I would be a bit more positive towards, is it a good strategy? I think that trading and the idea of equal partnership is a good strategy. And I don't share all your skepticism around this, saying that we have to put in that it's about local impact as well. It's about reaching the very poor people. I think it's fine to say that trade in itself is a value, and if we can start building up business relations, it will actually provide positive impacts locally as well. I mean, investing in countries creates jobs. Jobs also gives people an income that they can actually use in the market and thereby have trickle-down effects from the poor communities. And that's not actually my words, that's from I learned this from a Danish trade union partner. So it's actually a representative of the workers who are saying that this is quite positive. So I think the idea of looking into these equal partnerships, saying how can we actually get more trade, is something that can also provide values to the country. But of course, it has to be done in the right way. I think Ketil in the earlier panel mentioned there has to be a budget for it. We have to think about how to do it. And we still have to have our values intact. And I don't use all my time now, but I mean, take an issue like critical raw materials. Yes, we have an interest in accessing them. I think African countries, many have an interest in extracting them and selling them. But isn't it more in the interest of a country to do it together with the EU companies and the EU, where we also put emphasis on sustainability, workers' rights, environmental impact?
We say we do.
We say we do, but we actually do.
Okay.
I mean, I won't say that nothing has ever happened from history or we haven't done that. But going forward, this is something that's in the mission of many Danish investors, bank systems, and it is in most of our member companies have strategies around this and are committed to this.
Okay.
So I think there are still positive effects to be had, but we've
yet to see them. We've yet to see them. Yes, but let's come back to perhaps later on what would you need for this to work for your members, right? But Paul Okumo, let me quote you. I could quote you all day. There's a lot of good quotes from you. This is one. Global Gateway is about persuading countries in the Global South to take up loans for projects that they do not need for supposed benefits that they will not have. End of quote. Would you care to elaborate on that, Paul?
And let me say one thing before I elaborate on that. One is when I was coming here, I was asking myself, what am I coming to do? It took me around, 14 or 16 hours to get here.
And thank you for that.
I don't know whether to thank me, but we are coming to discuss Global Gateway that is in its 4th year. And I'm still being asked basic questions. What is the Global Gateway? So I'm asking myself, so what are European citizens doing? What is Global Focus doing? There's only 2 years left. of the Global Gateway. It is coming to an end in 2027. But you are asking me in October from tomorrow of 2025, what is the Global Gateway, when already close to, I know that there is no money to it, but if you cumulatively look at what the countries have given, including the European Investment Bank, close to around 200 billion has already been given out. So what are we coming to discuss here? That was kind of like the thing that frustrates me a little, that I think as
you don't know why you're
as
here.
European civil society, we discuss things from a place of comfort, and we know that we are the ones who are benefiting from the pain of the Africans, and so we have got all the time, and we also don't have the urgency, and that frustrates me quite a bit. So let me respond to your quote by giving you a very practical example. So in August last year, the Danish government, let me make sure I get the figures right, promises 295 million kroner to Ethiopia for a power project. The project has got a name for it. I'm trying to get what the name was. So it promises that it will build this power project. In fact, it was actually commissioned last year. It will provide 300 gigawatt hours of electricity by the time it is over. It will benefit directly 300,000 Ethiopians, families, and 700 million Ethiopians by the time it is fully operational. Sounds very nice. Until I looked at the report from the Ethiopian government. And the report from the Ethiopian government says already the dam that they've just commissioned produces 5.7 gigahertz of power, twice the capacity that the Ethiopian government need. So they don't need anything else from Denmark. But Denmark is excited about just having launched electricity supply last year. Ironically, the entire project, out of the 293 million, 146 million euros of that money was given to Siemens to do the work. Another 30 million was given to 2 consulting companies from Denmark to do the work. So you look at all this and you tell yourself, first of all, the project is not needed because there's already too much power that Ethiopia has. Number 2, already 70% of it has gone back to Denmark. So they really worry about that. But here's the sad part. The entire money is a loan. So it will have to be paid for by the Ethiopians for a power that they don't need, done by a company that they don't own. With the taxes, as you were told by the former Prime Minister here, coming back to pay for your holidays in August, coming back to pay for your maternity leave, coming back to pay for your primary education. If you look at all the 127 global gateway projects on the African continent, and I can assure you, I have looked at every single one of them, they follow that pattern. Not even a single one of them is an exception. So when I sit back and I ask myself, so what exactly is changing in how the EU is working with the continent? I say, for the last 142 years, nothing has changed. And it is what Tanya mentioned. It is not so much that you do good. It's that right from the beginning, you do not begin intending to do good. So there is no way you can do good along the way if your starting point is, and I'll conclude with this. Somebody in Brussels that I will not mention told me, when I confronted them with all this trade agreement and the disparity and why Africa keeps on facing challenges of its negotiations, they told me, you know what, Paul? You are speaking to the wrong people. I am a civil servant, employed to take care of 500 million citizens. across Europe. They want a paid holiday every August. They want breakfast every morning on their tables, and they want it to come from organic eggs. They want fruits when they wake up. They want cereals when they wake up. They want 9 months of paid leave for maternity. They want to get 80% of their salary when they're on holiday, and they want to go to the Caribbean in August. If I am to do that, I cannot do it with the kind of manufacturing that takes place in Europe. I must go to Africa and get the resources there so as to feed the 500 million people. And so the problem is not me who is a civil servant. The problem are the citizens who are making demands that they know cannot be fulfilled without us destroying other continents. I'll finish there.
Thank you, Paul. So, I won't quote you again because there are too many words around the quotes. Yeah. So Theo, Theo Ib Larsen, you are not the inventor of the global gateway. You're not a politician. You're not the EU. We're not going to string you up somewhere down here. And Paul will be nice to you when you leave. So, but how do you see this? And perhaps you should, in your answer, include as well, where do you come into this? You're better at it than I am. So that's one picture. Here's another one. Here's a third one. How do you see it, the global gateway?
Yeah, I mean, we could be talking about very different things here.
Exactly.
Because I'm a very big fan of the global gateway. I'll get back to that in just a sec. I'm from Impact Fund Denmark, which is the development finance institution of the Danish government. So we're owned by the government, and the law stipulates that we must invest for sustainable development and attainment of the SDGs. This is what the law says we have to do.
They should love you, both of them.
I mean, but anyway, so that's the law. We prioritize our investments are either directed at creating more inclusive societies. So, for example, job creation, and this is all in the private sector. We work with private investors in Africa, private banks, funds. So it's either inclusive societies or the green investments. So things that have to do with climate, biodiversity, adaptation, mitigation. These are the two overall impact priorities that we look for. And I say that because we do have two bottom lines. One is creating impact. The other one is making a return on our investments. The money that we receive from the government in the end Danish taxpayers is entrusted to us to maintain and to reinvest the returns that we get from that. This is a model that every European country has. I just wanted to sort of explain how that works. Now, in addition to the funds that we have, we try to mobilize more capital from private markets. So Danish pension funds is a group of investors that we're working with. And to get private capital into Africa at the moment is not easy. It was not easy prior to the current situation that we're in, but it certainly has not gotten easier. There is a very high degree of uncertainty and risk feeling in the investment group. So we have from the EU under the Global Gateway a guarantee that we can use to de-risk the investments that we do. And I say this because we always look at returns and risks. If the risk level is very high, our returns need to be higher. But if we can either bring down the risk level of an investment or increase the returns, we can do a lot more than what we can do just with our own capital. And this is where the EU Global Gateway comes into play. This is just a small part of the EU Global Gateway, which is also public investments and what have you. But this part of it, directed at private investments in developing countries, I think works pretty well. And we can access these funds because we are what's called pillar assessed. So we're accredited to manage EU funds. We can de-risk our investments and we can use soft money or grant capital from the EU to improve the investments. So this allows us to do things that otherwise we would not do, because of the risk-return balance that we're looking at. So yeah, I'm a fan of it. Absolutely, I am.
So now we're dividing the group here. So fans and not so much fans. Let me ask you. This is not something I made up. This is the organizations that are responsible for putting us together today. Who found this question? I think it's a good question, and you do too. So let me pose it now. If the four of you were to implement a Team Europe initiative together, what would be the most important thing to consider? Because now we're playing a game, we're putting you into the same room, the money, the criticism, and the African voice here, the private industries who are not to be found anywhere, and civil rights, right? So if you begin, Tanya, what would be important? You're listening to all this nice money and all the money that is risk capital that might be used in a way that you would think was the right way. What would it take? What would be the first thing you were to make sure in that room was there? Do I make sense?
Yes,
okay.
You're making sense. What would be the thing that I would do as part of if I were going to be planning a global gateway project? Okay.
Exactly.
So let me correct a false impression first of all. I'm not against trade. I'm not against investment. I think they're absolutely critical and countries can't advance without them. So let's imagine I'm now planning a global gateway project. It's going to be good fun. Let me say that the first thing that I would want to know is, where is the money coming from?
Yes.
Because where I differ from some of the EU or other officials who are dealing with the global gateway is that I don't think that it should be ODA that is used to underpin these loans and creating debt and all the rest of it. I don't think that that is the point of the ODA. I think that this would be the first thing that we would need to discuss. Where's the money coming from for all of this? Maybe I can just...
and just for those who don't know what ODA is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm so good with acronyms. I just keep dropping them.
I know.
ODA is Official Development Assistance.
Right.
This has a specific purpose. It has a definition which is agreed by the OECD. So it's not me making stuff up. And part of this definition is that the primary beneficiary of official development assistance must be the partner country. It doesn't say anything about benefiting the donor country. And this is why I have an issue, and I take umbrance with the use of ODA for the global gateway. I don't think it should be used to combine with blending and all these other things and creating debt in the EU's partner countries. So that would be the first thing that I would want the group of the four of us to agree on.
Okay, can you agree? Yes.
I will disagree, but
okay. We'll get back to it.
I think that a competitiveness fund needs to be used for this, and I'm all up for investment, and the money should be coming from that. In fact, the EU has just created one, and I think that that's where member states should be piling their money into, and then we create clear lines. We have investment, and ODA can be used for what it was originally supposed to be used for, which is then going to be making sure that the impact is had in partner countries.
Okay. And yes, for your companies, what would benefit them? We're still in that room, right?
Yep.
So what needs to be in that room for you to say, this is a thing that Dansk Industry can really appreciate?
Yeah, maybe to say also who Dansk Industry are, because I assume most of you know, but we are a business organization based here in Denmark. 20,000 member companies, very much.
They have a lot of money as well, just if you should ever...
Not as an organization, I would say. But
yeah, well, never mind. You have a big voice in Denmark, yes.
We have a big voice in Denmark. We believe very much in the private sector also as being part of driving growth and development. And just to clarify, I actually want to do good. I mean, I believe strongly that the work we are doing can be part of doing good. And what I do in DI, which is very specific, is working with other business organizations in developing countries to also see how do we create jobs and growth locally to help their organizations support the local development of the business community. And that's where I disagree a little bit, maybe, that the ODA can't be used for those sorts of interventions. But of course we have to, if we design a project, let's say a port. We want to invest in a port. We have some Danish companies having interest there. Of course, it has to. There has to be something around that. Maybe the business case is sound enough, but can we make the infrastructure around that? Can the global gateway support that? Maybe direct it to the partner countries, so it's not an investment, but saying we'll build the roads, we'll build some of the infrastructure around that, but also be a bit visible like the Chinese are doing. I would love to do that.
We need bigger signs.
We need bigger signs.
Right.
You know, the ones with all the C's, you know, when you go to the airport in Kampala or in Nairobi, you know, that
we need our
that's
own dragon
Yeah,
picture.
we need something there. But something tangible. I would then put in some education programs, so skills development for local people, so they can actually work in some of these projects. And let's look at where the sub-suppliers are. Where can we have involved local companies? This is partly what we're doing for our network of working with the local businesses, saying how can they contribute to projects like that? How do we lift them on the sustainability agenda so they actually also provide decent work and also provide environmental benefits for their country? And then they participate in the project. Maybe not supply the wind turbines because that's not being produced in Africa. Sorry, but maybe in the future, if the interest is big enough, then it can be produced locally, and we should educate people to do it. And we are currently doing a project in South Africa where we're looking into educating people within the wind turbine industry, but in maintenance, because the manufacturing is not there yet. And then I would go into dialogue with the European companies, from my perspective, the Danish one, but they can be European, and find out what is it we need for this project to succeed, and how can we get something produced locally, and how can we come in with our competences. And I think it's quite fair, and I think actually that's also part of an equal partnership and equal relations is going into transaction openly, but also being based on values. I got a little bit shocked when the guy from the EU, Domenico, said that we can't have equal partnerships because we're too unequal. And I think that's, for me, and maybe I'm too much of an idealist and a little bit naive, but if you always define relationship based on power, of course we can't have equal relationships. But if you also say that we can have equal dialogue, even though we have different sorts of economic power, that requires respect, that requires an intention for long-term development. And I think that's what the EU are good at. Maybe not the EU, but some of the EU countries at least, and some of the European companies to actually see beyond the short-term transaction and see at the long-term relationship and how that can benefit. Yeah, maybe that's too much ideas, but that's how I see it.
Yes, thank you. Paul?
I'll take you on immediately after this. I've got 50 companies that would want to engage with you. So I want to see if you actually mean what you say. But let me first of all just, I don't know what the issue is, to correct some perception. I have been coming to Europe since around 2008. In fact, my first European country to come was in Denmark. And we had an argument with the embassy whether Turkey is part of Europe or not. And one of the things that I have found is that when I have discussions with the citizens, you are some of the kindest and some of the best individuals in terms of reflection and understanding. And that always encourages me every time I come. What baffles me is how your governments behave. Because when you listen to the citizens, they actually come across as meaning very well and very well intentioned. But I don't know what happens when they cross over into politics and government. I don't know what's
is that perhaps a different discussion? And
yes.
What happens to people when they become politicians?
But now the answer to the question.
So you wouldn't take a Danish politician into the room, you would take a Danish citizen with the right values. Is that
if they're willing to speak with the citizen's heart, not with the politician's heart, whatever that. But if I was to come back to your question, the first thing that I would do is to get rid of this 150 billion that they say is for Africa. Because the perception that Africa needs money is extremely misplaced, completely misplaced.
Okay.
I would work on the Global Gateway, something that I proposed to the EU in May of 2015 when we were discussing the 2030 agenda, and which they accepted in principle, and then immediately I took a flight to Nairobi, they rejected it. And that is the best way that you can implement any initiative that would lift the African continent is to focus on trade. the amount of raw material that gets out of the continent and which feeds Europe is mind-boggling. Coltan alone, let me just give you the figures. For last year, 2024, the amount of coltan that came out of the DRC in one single year and which ended up in Europe was 267 billion euros. By the way, that's a B. It is so shocking that when I spoke to somebody from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Denmark, they couldn't believe that figure until I gave them the statistics. That is just one. You have not mentioned everything else. And so the way that the trade is deliberately skewed in favor of just ensuring that Africa can only supply raw materials is the greatest cause of poverty, violence, and conflict on the continent. Because what it does is it weakens societies over time. Secondly, it causes despondency because we cannot create jobs. Number three, it creates a rising of a small elite who know that all that they need to do is to please a few European countries and they can ship out everything and not care about the taxes. If you did that, we don't need a global gateway. And by the way, if we did that, the amount of benefit that would accrue to Europe will be dramatic. There's a statement I said, what would Europe look like if it had spent the last 142 years strengthening and building Africa's economy and governance? What would it have looked like? So for me, the issue about trade, which is why I tend to disagree a little bit about ODA, because even if you look at the ODA, and I wish that somebody here is willing to do a study, if you do a study of where the ODA eventually goes, we did some studies some way back in 2015, out of the, 20 billion euros or thereabout, I'm trying to remember, which is given to civil society, 98.2% stays in the European civil society. Only 1.8 ends up with what we are calling partners. Then if you look at the rest of the ODA, there is 50% of that goes to what is called blended finance, which is supporting European companies, but it is classified as ODA. Then you've got another percentage that goes as the way that the OECD classifies ODA. There's another percentage that goes to the continent, but it goes as a loan. But since it is below a particular interest rate, it is classified as a grant. So in other words, if we really want to do trade, which for me I think would be the thing, then let's do trade openly in a way that is non-exploitative.
And let's call it something else. I'm hearing you say as well. We'll open for questions, but before we do, so again, how are you going to ask your questions? What are you going to ask about? I think we'll have time for some. But Theo, you should have the floor before anything else.
Just quickly. So our investments are not tied to Danish business. I think yes, but with which they were, but they're not. So that's clearly not something that we are dealing with at the moment. I think if I was to design a new phase of the global gateway, I would make sure that it becomes more of a bottom-up process, that we listen to the African voices when we design it, and less European bureaucracy in Brussels. I think it's worth looking at Afrobarometer. I think Peter Kravlund or Adam Moe or somebody talked about Afrobarometer earlier. If you look at that, that's an opinion poll of Africans. What always comes up on top of these is more jobs. Unemployment or underemployment is an issue. And the many young people of Africa definitely need better and more productive jobs. Now, if we're going to do that, we need more investments in Africa. And when we look at our investment opportunities out there, Africa is in competition with Asia, Latin America, and some European countries. And it's actually quite difficult for us to get more capital into Africa. It's not because we don't want to, but it's a very challenging environment to work in. So, I think more policy work with governance and so on, I couldn't agree more. But where I come from, it's about the investment side of things. And there I would also ask Global Gateway to keep it predictable. Don't redo everything next year. We are starting to use it. It's starting to work. It has taken some time, but more of that. And in terms of intention and additionality of the Global Gateway, I think we should have more focus on the LDCs, the low-income countries in Africa, and the fragile environments. That's clearly where more support is needed and where the money is even less likely to flow. In a sense, it's not too difficult to invest in South Africa and Morocco. This is Africa, but it's not the Africa that needs it most or where our capital is needed most. So I think there is something to be said for a new phase of Global Gateway. And these are some of the things I would bring to the table. Because indeed, it should not be about European industrial policy. It should be about making an impact in Africa. And so that's what I would bring to the mix.
Thank you. So let's have a few questions. Yes, you have the...
Thank you. This question is for Jesper Friis, because earlier during the speech or the panel, you, I would say, expressed a few very, in my opinion, neoliberal ideals about trickle-down economics and about how these investments in Africa through Global Gateway will breed more investment through private sector partnerships and private sector investment. My question for you is, how is this much different from some of the structural adjustment programs we saw throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so forth, through IMF and World Bank loans? As someone with a background in development economics myself, this seems rather problematic because I'm not hearing anything new. I think this is a lot of the same rhetoric we heard 40 years ago, and I didn't hear it. I'm quite young, unlike some of this room. But my question for you is, how do you view Global Gateway not repeating the same mistakes as some of these SAPs from the 70s and onwards?
Yeah.
Well, I might look older, but I wasn't listening in the 70s either. I was busy playing around, so I'm not too sure I can comment on those specific programs. And I actually mentioned those words that I had talked about the trickle-down effect and the purchasing powers of individuals. It's actually from one of my good friends from the Danish trade unions, so a lefty, as Henrik would call him. It's just that I believe in that. But I don't think it's particularly neoliberal to say that if you give people more money in their hand, they can actually start helping to grow the economy. That being said, I think Global Gateway should focus much more on some of the things that Paul are mentioning, actually. The trade, but also the local production, the local value addition of raw materials. And we have a few examples of that. And I think Theo actually also invested in some of that in coffee roasting in Kenya, in particular juice manufacturing in the same country. So it's not only about big infrastructure and energy projects. Danish companies are actually investing locally with support from and risk management from IFDs to create local jobs, to create local production. And we have to enable that. And that's what I think the Global Gateway should do. It should not may not be Global Gateway who have to invest in these projects. That's what Theo and his people can do. But they should create this enabling environment for the infrastructure to be there. So I think it's actually good that they're investing in energy in Ethiopia. I assume the Ethiopians have asked for it because they can see the need, a growing energy market. And if you look at the manufacturing sector in many African countries, including Ethiopia, which I visited many times, they are lacking a stable energy supply for actually being competitive. So that's not a bad thing. If you then can create the platform for investments in specific companies and projects that can then create these jobs that we need. And I think it's different from extending loans to to governments and asking them to deregulate a lot of things. It's actually about creating specific jobs and developing specific companies in African countries.
Tanya, you have a comment as well to this?
Yeah, it's interesting listening to everybody because I think there's actually a certain amount of commonality here. I mean, we would all be interested in creating local jobs, for example. We all see the benefit there. We all see the benefit of creating local wealth. And we're all talking about what the Global Gateway should do, which is quite interesting. It should do this and it should do that and it could do this and it could do that, but it's nothing about what it actually does.
It doesn't do anything.
We've got this ideal version of the Global Gateway, which is rather far from the actual Global Gateway. And this is a bit the problem of the conversation that we're having, if I may. So I completely agree with you, Theo, that, for example, we need to build this bottom up. We need to discuss with partner country governments, what would you actually like? Let me give you an example. Namibia. Namibia has its own strategy for what it wants to do and where it wants to, invest and grow. The two number one points of, priority for it are agriculture and sport. I won't mention who was the EU official I was talking to when I found this out, but the person started laughing when they found out it was sport. I'm like, I'm sorry, but that's their priority. That's down to them to decide what their priorities are. But agriculture wasn't what the EU was going to be offering for Namibia for investment. And this is the problem. The EU comes with its values-based offer and says, you can have this if you would like it. If you don't like it, no problem. We'll go elsewhere.
Theo, can you recognize that?
Well, I mean, certainly when we invest, we do it with local partners. So we are not close to government with these investments. But definitely, countries have, or some countries have plans and visions for their development and for where they will be in 2030, 2040, 2050. And, that's a political decision. But when we have, when we invest, it's always as a minority investor. And so we are not the ones who control the, we have to agree to the investment. But it's one removed from government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, please.
My question is to Theo. Has the impact funds actually been involved in any Global Gateway project? If yes, could you elaborate a little bit on what you have seen of criteria that you have put forward and the results for the local population of those projects? And if it is a no or projects that you have turned down, is it because you have found that it was difficult actually to have your views accepted and integrated in the project? So we get a little bit more of information of the real world. And that's one of my issues more in general with the Global Gateway. I think it's very difficult to get the content of the now 250 projects which is underway. And I think that the Commission or whoever it is that has the responsibility should be a little bit more detailed in the actual implementation of the project and the consequences of those projects.
Theo?
Yeah, great. Two things. One is that we have approached the EU for guarantees directly into the Brussels machinery. That is quite complicated, and it requires a bit of a lot of stamina to keep up that work. So that's one observation. We have amongst the European DFIs, the European Development Finance Institutions, Swedfund in Sweden, BII, no, well, that's Britain, but DEG in Germany and Popacu in France and so on. We have an umbrella organization in Brussels that approaches the EU for us. So we can develop our own projects, and we then take them there and say, this is the project we would like to invest in. We think it makes sense from CO2 reduction perspective, job creation or whatever. We present it to our umbrella organization, which has a predefined agreement with the Commission. So they are sort of the go-between between the bureaucracy and ourselves. And this allows us to not worry too much about the EU policy room but be more focused on de-risking and actual investment. We have one for the mobilization of institutional investors. We are mobilizing Danish pension funds to invest, and there we have a guarantee from under the Global Gateway, but deployed from the EU budget, under the development budget of the EU. We have a couple of investments where the EU has taken a specifically very risky position in an investment. So when the money, or if the money is lost, they take the first loss. So that allows us to take on investments in, for example, Somalia, which we would not have done without this type of cushion. So, we have a couple of examples. We have a partnership in Uganda as well, to invest alongside the EU. They take a more risky position. This is use of ODA, and because it's from the European development budget. And I agree, ODA is a very valuable resource, which should not be just distributed widely on anything. It needs to be very, we have to be very, economical with this resource. So that's why I agree with you. We have to find ways of not. I think we need it to get the capital into to African projects and companies for the investment purposes. But we have to be very careful on how we use it and how we deploy it. So back to your question, we have a couple of examples of actual. So it doesn't say EU Global Gateway. I mean, and I think the beneficiaries would never know it's a EU Global Gateway-backed investment. It's sort of behind. We have to put a European flag on the press material and so on, but it doesn't say this is a EU Global Gateway project. But it has a contribution from the EU. So, I think a lot of the things that come out of the Global Gateway are not that visible. So if you only look at what has a direct Global Gateway stamp on it, you will find some things, but you will also miss a lot of other things that are under the radar, so to speak. Oh yeah, no, very good. Yes, absolutely. I think it's amazing to be able to invest in a country like where Somaliland and Somalia and Puntland, where we have a fund that lends to local SMEs. So we would not have done that without the EU contribution and without MFA contribution that we've gotten as well, and some philanthropic investors. So I'm taking this example because it's an extreme example, and that's clearly not where we make the big returns. And that's where some ODA is needed, and that's why I said if I was in the room to discuss how do we think about the next overall strategy for Global Gateway, we should think about making sure that the countries that benefit from this are not only, Brazil, South Africa, and other countries that we are allowed to invest in, but focus on some of the countries that are really not on the radar of international capital.
Paul has a comment before you get. I'll give you the word, Paul. Let me just tell you that we have 7 minutes left before Tanya has to run. Hoping no drones in the airport, safe returns. I think we'll take your comment, Paul, and then we'll take maybe one last question, and then we'll wrap it up with a final comment. Paul.
I think for me, two very quick things. One is, let's be extremely honest, there is nothing called the Global Gateway. The Global Gateway is a branding strategy. It is neither a financing strategy nor an implementation strategy. The tools being used, these tools about blended finance and river, they have been around for the last 15, 20 years. So there's really nothing new that we are hearing right now about this language of de-risking and river. They have been there. And actually, before the UK left, it was the largest country in terms of taking ODA money and using it to de-risk for its own companies. I want to just clarify something here. The problem with the whole essence of de-risking that I am hearing companies in Europe speaking about is that you are taking public money, technically free, giving it to your companies, so that they can get contracts in Africa for which those African private sector cannot get because they don't have that money. And then you are now telling me that they should be at least glad that they have a project. If we want to create a level playing field in terms of de-risking, let it be a level playing field for everyone, not for European companies.
Thank you for that remark. Last question. Yeah, please.
Thank you once again. My name is John Ono, representing Europe Dialogue. Paul, my brother, my question goes to you. You almost was going to answer the question I was going to put across to you. First of all, I want to thank you for speaking a very important truth to the EU represented in this place. Because we have heard so much about this narrative of how Europe is underdeveloping Africa, which is part of what we are saying here today. But just a quick one. My question is, what do you think? Because a lot of times when we talk about this narrative, how Europe is underdeveloping Africa, it's like we always want to put up this victim mindset, which I think we should begin to look at it differently. So I want to ask you this question. What do you think Africa as a continent can do differently? And what do you think the EU can also do differently in order to forge strong partnership for common sustainable future? Thank you.
Two very good questions. Thank you for them. Paul, can you keep it brief? Because then Mike can have the last, Tanya, sorry, can have her last remark before she's running out to join the drones, right?
She can go first.
Yeah, but can you?
First, because the question is to you, Paul.
Okay, all right. So it is not what Africa needs to do, this is what Africa is already doing. So number one is you can talk about China all you can. And in Africa, we say you can talk about it until the cows come home. But as long as there is a player who is offering an alternative that may appear difficult to you, but is not as controlling and is not one that covers up some good, is actually honest, the continent will always, and has started to do, looking for alternatives. And so I think that aspect of looking for alternatives, whether for bad or for worse, at least now there is an alternative. And I think we need to appreciate that rather than to keep on bashing the continent of why are you going to China, to that. But the second thing that I see is already beginning to happen is there are African companies that are saying, even with all the de-risking and all this loan, with all this subsidy of loans, we are actually willing to rise up and do some things. And if you look at the investment, especially in agriculture right now, you look at the investment even in energy, increasingly, there are a lot of African companies that are willing to say, we will take the risk and do it and see what comes out of it. I think for me, those things are good. Diplomatically, I keep on hearing, it is still not very, very public, but every time I sit with many of the African government leaders, they tell me how they're increasingly challenging some of the concepts that Europe communicates in public, but then don't act on in private.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I was going to ask you as the final question, the rest of the panel will have the same question as a final remark. What will be your message to the Danish presidency? But as you can see very clearly, this is not a question that Tanya would very much, you'd like to say something else?
I wanted to just pick up maybe a few strands, if I may, of a conversation that's already been had. So a few issues have come up, and I just want to make a couple of comments, if I may, in the closing words.
Yes.
So,
it's your closing words.
Thank you. The EU is talking all about competitiveness at the moment and securing its own interests. For me, having a competitive approach is also fundamentally undermining a partnership approach. That would be something that I would say. So this is my addition to the mindset change that I think that we need. Secondly, I think that the EU needs to stop playing catch up with China. China will always be years ahead. It has a completely different way of functioning. It has a completely different modus operandi, same thing to put in Latin, sorry about that. But I mean, that is the beauty in a way of being governed, the beauty in inverted commas, of being governed by a dictator for years and years and years. You can have a focus and you can follow the focus, and when it's proving that it works, you keep going there. The EU is permanently swip-swapping all the time, changing, and it's being political about things. So it's trying to follow the money, follow the power, follow the visibility, etc. That's not what will actually make the change for people on the planet at the end of the day. So I think the EU needs to take a step back and do a bit of thinking, and this could be led by the Danes by all means, do a bit of independent thinking as to what the EU really wants to do and what it wants to be known for and how it wants to shape the world. Because we are entering a very, very troubled period. And I don't think that entering a troubled period with a spirit of competitiveness will make that period any less troubled. So that would be a second message that I would like the EU as a whole, but also the Danes, to be thinking about. What would be our long-term vision for the world and the role that the EU is going to be playing in it? And now I would really like to come back to what you said, Theo, because I fully agree that investing in let's say LDCs, because we understand the terminology. I don't like the terminology, but it's less developed countries and fragile states would be amazing. The EU's not going to go there. But if you, Theo, could try and persuade the EU to do that, we would be all behind you and willing to work in good partnership together with you to do that, because the EU doesn't want to go there because it's not going to make money and it's not going to bring the profit back to the EU. In terms of your question, there was a gentleman over there asking about results and all the rest of it. I would just like to make a comment about transparency. I think we should all be calling for much more information and much greater transparency about what's going on with the global gateway and these billions that are supposedly being created thanks to these projects. In actual fact, there's no information out there. You can hardly get anything about even the value of the projects, let alone the partners who are involved and the private sector companies and all the rest of it. Why? Because DFIs have their own rules. It's not even following EU rules. So the EIB is not even allowed to tell us which might be the private sector companies that they might be working with in a given transaction. And that kind of comes back to tracking ODA. It is extremely difficult to track ODA, and Concord does this every single year. And we've got we're doing extra research now on it. And the moment you become this term, pillar assessed entity, it basically equals black box. So any money that gets channeled through a pillar assessed entity, and I don't blame you if you don't know what we're talking about, it basically means black box. We'll never ever find out what happened to that money. So all of us together need to be pushing for greater transparency, because actually it would serve all of our purposes better. I don't know whether you agree with that, but
I'm fully for transparency. There's a lot of other things I disagree
so
with.
I personally think that would be a much better way to create a real partnership. Actually, let's start putting the information on the table so we all know what we're talking about and we all have the same information and can make wise decisions.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. And good luck with whatever is in the sky above you, riding to the airport. So let's wrap it up. Jesper, again, I will, since I have allowed you to answer any question you might think of on your own, so because you know, so that goes for you as well. Exactly, you're a rebel. But if you are in doubt, I would like you to somehow address what will be your message to the Danish presidency, because that is also why we are here today, right? But like I said,
it would definitely not be to not focus on kind of competitiveness of Europe, because that's, I think, extremely important that we remain a competitive region. Also, if we're going to trade more with the African countries, I mean, if we are not competitive, the European companies will fall away, be even less interesting as a partner. And I firmly believe that, I won't say better, but there's a value in it for African companies to trade with European companies, also because of some of the values we are based on. And that's also a regulatory matter from the EU now, with all the sustainability regulation that actually looks into the value chain and thereby also gives European companies a responsibility, which they're already taken, in terms of how do their investment or partnerships impact the local environment and the local population.
Okay.
So
that's what you would not do?
No, I would not do that.
So briefly, what
more competitiveness?
Yeah.
Use, I agree totally. I mean, more private investments, use the ODA to enable those private investments, use it in partnership with the African countries. Focus, yes, not only on the LDCs, but because I think it's also still important that we work with some of the growth engines. And we just again have to remember that Africa are many different things. We heard that, but when you mentioned DRC, I mean, that's a particular case which cannot be expanded to all of Africa. Luckily, we have much more well-governed countries. And then just lastly, it makes me a little bit sad going from here that we are almost seeing it as a zero-sum thing, that if we partner more, if we have more growth in Europe, we'll be taking things from our African partners. I mean, I've worked in Africa now for 15 years. I meet many private companies there. They would love to trade with European companies on equal terms. It's a good thing, and I think we can actually create jobs both in Europe and in Africa together for the mutual benefit. And I think that's what we should be focusing on instead of turning this into some narrative where we can't have one without the other.
Paul?
I'll begin from where you have mentioned. When I listened to Christian, who was speaking in the previous panel, and he was answering to a question that she had raised, I was a little bit, my heart sank a little, because the conversations that he's saying we need to have, we have had them for the last 25 years. And Europe has made it categorical. They will not give an inch on those conversations. Issues around taxes, they have made it clear, even in the last discussions in Seville, they will not, no matter what we do. Issues of making sure that Africa is not just giving raw materials, and that they will make the rules that allow for more manufacturing around intellectual property. They have made it clear, not here, but at the WTO, that they will not have that discussion no matter what we do. Now, when you begin a discussion from there, and then somebody is sitting here and saying, we need to have that discussion, it's extremely disappointing for me when I look at the deaths in the DRC, and I can see all those deaths is so that you guys can eat, and you just don't receive. So I like the idea that you mean well, and that there are a lot of European companies that would want to mean well. What I would want to see is how you can take that further. And this is not just about you. It's about you who are seated here, and challenge your governments that we can't go on like this by casting things on stone, but then publicly pretending that you want to have dialogue about it.
Thank you, Paul. Theo, last remarks?
So I think competitiveness of Europe and rivalry with other regions is on the, it's what will happen in Brussels over the next few months, whether we like it or not. That's where it's going. I think it's important to remember the intentionality and additionality of the investments that we do. Again, we are not directly tied to Danish business interests. We screen all our investments for the impact that it intends to create on the ground. And I think that's important because if we do not retain that, things become very blurred between different objectives. I think it's very important when we talk about using ODA for investments that we remember the intention of it. Because export credits, for example, which do finance a lot of European deliveries into other countries, has a very different intention behind it. It's to promote businesses. So I think we have to be very clear about these two things. Some of the projects that we're looking at may have both components in them, but we will only participate if we can see the impact of what we invest in. I think there may be room for more collaboration between these different sides. But I think we have to be very careful. Yeah.
Let's give them a big hand. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much.
So throughout the afternoon, indeed the entire day, we've had important, strong, lively and insightful perspectives on the purpose of EU's international partnerships and how to move forward. And I really hope that all of you have gotten new insights and fresh perspectives. You have chosen to spend a whole day here, and I truly hope that even though we may have discussed from a place of comfort, you have all gotten new knowledge so that you can also feel the urgency, and that, at least from my perspective, from Global Focus as a civil society organizations, we talk about our role as both watchdogs, bridge builders, change makers, and I think that all of that is needed to navigate in this crazy and beautiful world of ours. Rather than to make a long speech now, I would like to encourage you to reflect amongst each other just for a minute or two to talk about what you've heard today and also what kind of action you will take with you out of the door in your continuous work. So I'll just give you a minute or two to reflect and talk to the person or persons sitting next to you. Okay, I should have guessed, excuse me, I'm sorry, I should have guessed. Of course you would need more than a minute or two to reflect on all the things that we've heard here today. But then it's good that we have a reception coming up where you can continue the discussions. Before officially closing this conference and inviting you to the reception, I would just like to give out a few thanks to everyone who has made today possible. And today has indeed been a purposeful partnership. I'd like to thank Mette Vibe Utzon for guiding us through today in such an engaging manner. Thank you so much, Mette. Are you already on your way out? Yeah? No. Thank you. And also really a warm thanks to all our speakers who have so generously shared all their insights and perspectives and also been talking very clearly and bluntly, which I think is a brilliant foundation for good conversation. So thank you so much. Then a warm thanks to all the partners who has helped make this possible and pursuing this important topic, viewpoints on the role of EU from very different starting points also. And a warm thanks to everyone behind the scenes who have made this day possible, everything from the sound system to making coffee and taking notes and saying hello to you all when you entered the room. And then a warm thanks to all of you for coming here today, contributing, making sure that this was such an enriched and elevated conversation. Thank you so much. And now there is some drinks, reception, I don't know where. Maybe it's right in here. Oh, first, what? There's an exhibition on the first floor, and that's where there'll be a reception with some drinks. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.